Hey everyone, Wolf Lord Rho here. Today we review the Warhammer 40k novel, The Rose in Darkness, by author Danie Ware. As always with my reviews, it'll be spoiler free, followed by a little spoiler reaction talk after. My main takeaways from the book I'd like to discuss with those that have already read the book. But as always, let's begin by checking out the synopsis off the back of the book. Opal, a gleaming shrine world of saints and soldiers, beloved of the Emperor himself. Sent to retrieve the skull of the revered Saint Vera's, Sister Superior Augusta of the Order of the Bloody Rose, and her squad find themselves in the midst of the capital's holiest festival, a time of reverence and celebration. But all is not well. Despite what its planetary leaders would have Augusta believe, political danger bubbles under the surface, and rebel attacks gnaw away at the city's outskirts. The greatest threat, however, is yet to come, as it becomes horrifyingly apparent that a gene-stealer cult has its claws under the planet's skin. The sisters realise that can mean only one thing: a hive fleet is on its way to Opal, and with it, the planet's doom. Okay, now The Rose in Darkness has three main characters that carry this story for me. The first, as stated within the synopsis, is Sister Superior Augusta. The second, a side story of sorts featuring a young native of the world named Camilla. And the third, I would say, is the world of Opal itself. Immediately in diving into this story, it became apparent how rich the vibrancy of Opal came to life. It's really a pretty unique setting, I would say, for a 40k story. A world in the midst of a festival. And it is really hammered in how important this festival is to the world. This isn't some weekend event down your local town centre. This is an event that has come to define the world's entire existence, becoming fundamental to its economy. And you really feel the impression of it. The effect is quite palpable. The ridiculous crowds, the press of the bodies, the sheer commerciality of it all. Again, a very unique scenario for your usual 40k story. And the author Danie Ware does a great job of creating that immersion. It's a nice contrast to the grim dark you always come to expect. Now, those elements of grim dark are absolutely there. Even on a jewel of a world, the truth lies below the surface. And Opal is no different. The deprived struggling their existence in the city outskirts, and the greater dangers within. And of course the selfish, agenda-driven governance of the world itself, as so often in the Imperium entire, ultimately its unknowing own worst enemy. The main protagonist and driving force of the story, Sister Superior Augusta and her squad, largely came across as you hoped they would. Emperor-worshipping, heretic-purging sisters of battle. When the action is on, it's everything you'd hope to see. The sororitas doing what they do best, purging the Xeno and the heretic. However, for all the action, which does heat up as the story goes on, I'd say there's equally as much intrigue and development that guides this story. A little bit more thinking within the mind. And I actually think this may have been one of the strongest areas. Watching and listening to Augusta and her sisters slowly coming to realise that something isn't quite right. How they set about discovering and learning more of the world around them. The impact the presence of a sister could have in the midst of a religious festival. It all felt very genuine and all kind of blended together very well. I found myself incredibly frustrated in the moments Augusta had to deal with the typical political posturing and diplomacy. So much so that I felt it was probably taking away my enjoyment a bit. But of course I was supposed to feel this way, to a large degree at least. You're supposed to feel the frustration in Augusta having to deal with these people, because that's exactly what she feels. And like her, you know how oblivious these fools are to the wider picture, the true dangers of the galaxy around them. That said, however, I would have just liked Augusta to be a little bit more forceful. There were times I was as shocked as the rest of her squad at her seeming platitude behaviour. There's a great comparison to her decisions later, where I couldn't help but feel, yeah, this is how it's done. This is what you should have been doing. Now, that's not all Augusta's fault, as I'll discuss later, but I would have liked a little bit more bite and steel within her at times. But then again, maybe some of that naivety came with her rank. She was only a Sister Superior after all. Now, the side character of Camilla had me a little confused at the beginning as to who she actually was and what was really going on. Essentially a young cadet of the world. With the vibrancy and the grandness of the festival and Opal itself, I think I got a little lost in the spectacle of it all, which was all transpiring around Camilla as you're learning about this character. For me, it overawed her in some ways. And without going into spoilers, with dream descriptions and prayers interspersed throughout, it was all just a little confusing for me at the very beginning. But after those initial chapters, I got my bearings. And I think Camilla's story got on course and became more straightforward to follow. Now, I didn't particularly engage with Camilla the character throughout, or particularly care what her fate would be, but I definitely found her story gaining weight the more it became interwoven into that of the sisters. And it was done in a nice way. It didn't feel forced, there was a nice connection of the two through the events of the story. They came together very naturally. Perhaps my biggest enjoyment of the story was actually by accident, in that I didn't read the synopsis. I had no idea what the story was actually going to be. I saw a Sororitas book written by Danie Ware, so I got it. As so far I've absolutely loved the stories of the Sororitas I've read of hers so far. However, I've read the synopsis here and now, and we know the foe is a gene stealer cult. But I didn't. And honestly, I was getting vibes of Nurgle or something to begin as the plot began. So, when Augusta had the shock of unveiling a gene stealer cult instead, I absolutely had that shock as well. Of course, a complete accident, but it was absolutely great, really feeling the shocks and surprises genuinely unraveling. And I have to say, the author did a fantastic job at delivering those moments. I think it's something we take for granted, having usually read the synopsis, going into a story more or less knowing what's going to happen. Yet here, in accidentally perhaps not having that, I was able to experience all the shocks and surprises in their truest sense. And again, it was great. Now, as for cons or any negatives, there were one or two. I labelled one character in particular as a clear villain the second they appeared on the page. And just when I thought I was maybe going to be surprised, I wasn't. So it was a little shame that that intended surprise development didn't quite plan out for me personally. And with the stories generally being focused on the Order of our Martyred Lady when it comes to the Sisters of Battle, I was pretty interested to see the differences in this being the Sisters of the Bloody Rose, but I didn't really feel any. In hindsight, the orders aren't quite as diverse as, say, the Space Marine chapters across the galaxy, so they probably should feel pretty identical. But I don't know, it was just a little shame. I didn't feel any differences at all other than their red armour. And I'd say towards the end, I was just wondering why the sisters were doing what they were doing at the climax of the story. It was fun, it was engaging, the action was exciting, But I just had that sense of they didn't need to do it. But hey, it made for an exciting story. Those minor cons aside, overall I enjoyed the story, particularly as I said because I hadn't read the synopsis. So I was genuinely feeling the mystery of the investigation, the sisters' sense of something not being right. And then when the action does heat up, it's everything you want it to be. I may have disagreed with some of their actions, but the battles, the fighting, the action itself was great fun. And there's just something awesome about the Adeptus Sororitas purging the Xeno while singing hymns to the Emperor. Overall, I'd give this one a 3 out of 5. A perfectly enjoyable and good read. One I thoroughly enjoyed, without quite getting up to the peaks of goosebump raising. A read I definitely recommend if you're a fan of the Sisters of Battle. However, that's it for the spoiler-free review. Now on to a little spoiler reaction talk for those that have already read the book. So, not a huge amount of spoiler reaction to discuss today, as it was a fairly straightforward self-contained story. However, firstly, I absolutely loved the revelation of Opal being within Segmentum Solar. Not only did this help to showcase how and why Opal could have been a largely successful world, protected by its proximity to Terra, but it also helped reveal how, far from being the impregnable fortress of the Imperium, perhaps Segmentum Solar has been resting on its laurels, so to speak, safe in the knowledge the true threats are further afield, and how now that situation is very, very different. And of course, with this being a gene stealer cult within Segmentum Solar, it ties into the larger picture of Leviathan. Now, the clear villain for me as soon as he was introduced was the Archdeacon of the world. I would have loved to have been surprised, but this man just oozed smarminess and creepiness the second he came onto the page. For me, it was clear he was going to end up a villain of the piece. Now, the pretense held out for so long, I was just beginning to doubt if I got it wrong, with the deacon giving his sermons throughout the cult uprising. But no, he was part of the cult hierarchy all along. I don't know what I'd prefer, being right as I was or being surprised, and that he was just an entitled, foolish member of the ecclesiarchy instead. Now, my favourite piece of the entire story was the arrival of the Order in force, and immediately you felt that no-nonsense command of the Canoness. The second she set foot on Opal, business picked up immediately. I absolutely loved her. Within minutes, areas were secured, cultists were being purged, and she was talking to Opal's governing body how they should have been spoken to. Again, the Canoness was literally just command incarnate. I literally said out loud, "That's how it's done," as I was reading it. The indecision, the diplomatic tiptoeing of Augusta earlier, absolutely put to shame by the Canoness. Just again oozed real authority. I absolutely loved her, and honestly I wish she had arrived earlier in the story. Or we could have seen more of her leading the defense of the world. By far my favourite character of the story, an absolute badass without even having to really get involved in the action. Just her aura and the way she carried herself. A woman that no one wanted to mess with. Again, it's just a shame they arrived so near the end. Now, as for my big question of wondering why the sisters were doing what they were doing, well, that was because I didn't quite understand why they were bothering to hunt down the Patriarch and the other heads of the cult, when the Hive Fleet was already in the system. And indeed later, when it was already beginning its planetary assault. For me, it was too late. It didn't make any difference. The Tyranids were there already. I understand the desire for repentance and some revenge, but I don't know, I just thought they should be surely dedicated to the starports entirely, helping the last few refugees escape that they could. And yes, obviously the big bulk of the order was doing just that. However, I just couldn't grasp that nagging doubt of why you would waste any resources going after the Patriarch then. For me, it just felt too little too late. But hey, like I said, it made for some enjoyable action, there's no doubt about that. And I'd quite enjoy to see a sequel of this one. One maybe more on a conventional battle scenario. With the sisters, we see them as part of a crusade or a particular mission so often. I think it'd be nice to just see them on a straightforward battlefield against the enemy. Because hey, the Sororitas do that just as often as the Space Marines too. Maybe combating this very hive fleet itself further down the line. Giving us a chance to see how Augusta is growing as a commander. How the Bloody Rose is marshalling to stop this tendril. For me, I definitely think that would be fun, and I've got my fingers crossed for a sequel down the line. But anyway, that's it for today everyone. Have you read the story? If so, what did you think? As always, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. If you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too. But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.